Hi, I'm Viviana Chen. I'm 30 years old. 3 weeks ago, I walked into the Blackstone Foundation Gala at the Grand Lux Hotel in downtown Phoenix, wearing a black server's uniform and a fake smile, thinking I was there to carry trays and stay invisible in the shadows of the ballroom where I once commanded boardroom meetings. I walked out in handcuffs, but not the kind you'd expect. My former boss, Theodore Harrington III, thought he was delivering the ultimate humiliation by forcing me to serve champagne to the same venture capitalists I used to negotiate eight-figure deals with. My ex-colleagues from Pinnacle Investments thought it was the entertainment of the century, watching me balance silver trays while they sipped Dom Perignon and whispered about my spectacular fall from grace. But then FBI Special Agent Elena Vasquez approached me at the dessert station, her badge hidden beneath an elegant evening gown, and said 5 words that shattered their world. "Agent Lee, we need you." You see, they didn't just make me serve appetizers that night. They served themselves a federal racketeering investigation on a silver platter, complete with money laundering charges, securities fraud, and enough evidence to put half the room behind bars for the next decade. And I was the one who'd been collecting every crumb of evidence while they forced me to carry their champagne. What time are you hearing this? Are you sitting in your car after another soul-crushing day at work? Are you in your kitchen, wondering if you'll ever get the respect you deserve? Are you lying in bed, planning your escape from people who treat you like you're invisible? Drop a comment below because I read every single one, and I want to know who's listening while I tell you about the night my former colleagues at Pinnacle Investments learned that the disgraced employee they were humiliating was actually Special Agent Viviana Lee of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. And I'd been building their cases for 8 months while they thought I was just another broken woman they'd successfully destroyed. They wanted to watch me fall. Instead, they got front row seats to their own arrests. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with champagne and handcuffs. It starts with coffee and condescension, 8 months earlier, in a glass tower overlooking the Phoenix skyline where I thought I was building my career. Where I thought I mattered. Where I thought the people around me were colleagues, not criminals. My name is Viviana Chen, but for 8 months, I was Special Agent Lee. And this is the story of how Theodore Harrington III, managing partner of Pinnacle Investments, turned his own gala into a federal sting operation because he couldn't resist humiliating a woman he thought was powerless. I need you to understand something before we go any further. I'm not telling you this story for sympathy. I'm not looking for your pity or your outrage on my behalf. I'm telling you this because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in an office right now, being belittled, being underestimated, being treated like they don't matter by people who think they're untouchable. And I want you to know that sometimes, the person they're stepping on is the exact person who's going to bring their entire world crashing down. Sometimes, the server knows exactly what's in the soup. 8 months ago, I walked into the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower for what I thought was my dream job at Pinnacle Investments. Theodore Harrington III, and yes, he insisted everyone use his full name including the Roman numeral, like he was royalty instead of just another trust fund baby with a corner office, had personally recruited me from Goldman Sachs. "We need someone with your expertise in international markets," he'd said during the interview. His smile perfectly practiced, his handshake firm enough to seem confident, but not so firm as to seem desperate. What he didn't say, what none of them said, was that they needed someone with my expertise to legitimize what they were actually doing with those international markets. Someone with an impeccable reputation to put their name on documents that would make their money laundering operation look like sophisticated investment strategies. Someone smart enough to create the perfect paper trail, but naive enough to believe she was actually building something legitimate. I should have known something was wrong on my third day when Cynthia Blackwood, the head of client relations, handed me a stack of transfer authorizations and said, "Just sign these, sweetie. Theodore says you're the expert on offshore structures." The word sweetie should have been my first red flag. You don't call a senior vice president sweeties unless you're planning to treat her like a child. But I was so focused on proving myself, so determined to show them they'd made the right choice in hiring me, that I just smiled and started reviewing the documents. That's when I found the first discrepancy. A transfer to the Cayman Islands that was categorized as a diversification strategy, but had all the hallmarks of a shell game. The amounts were too round, the timing too convenient, the recipient entities too vague. I'd seen enough legitimate offshore investments to know what they looked like, and this wasn't it. I brought it to Theodore's attention during our Monday morning meeting, professional, respectful, just pointing out what I assumed was a clerical error. Theodore, I noticed some inconsistencies in the Meridian diversification transfers. The documentation doesn't match our compliance standards. The room went quiet, not the kind of quiet where people are thinking, but the kind where people are holding their breath. Theodore's perfectly veneered smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes, something cold and calculating. "Viviana," he said, and his voice had that patronizing tone that successful men use when they want to make you feel like you're overcomplicating things. "I appreciate your attention to detail, but these strategies are quite sophisticated. Perhaps you need more time to understand our methods here at Pinnacle. But here's the thing about being really good at financial analysis. You don't just see the numbers, you see the patterns. And the pattern I was seeing spelled out money laundering so clearly it might as well have been written in neon lights across the Phoenix sky. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention, not because I was suspicious, but because I was trying to understand their sophisticated strategies, so I could do my job better. I stayed late, reviewed files, cross-referenced transactions. What I found made my blood run cold. Pinnacle Investments wasn't just managing money for wealthy clients. They were washing money for people whose names appeared in FBI bulletins. Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, people whose dirty money needed to look clean. And Theodore Harrington III was providing that service with a smile and a Harvard MBA. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands were just the beginning. There were fake charitable foundations, non-existent art purchases, real estate deals that involved properties that didn't exist. It was elaborate, sophisticated, and completely illegal. And they were using my name, my reputation, my credentials to make it all look legitimate. That's when I made the call that changed everything. But not to the FBI. Not yet. I called my college roommate, Jessica Torres, who happened to be a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. We'd kept in touch over the years, the way ambitious women do when they recognize kindred spirits in each other. Late-night calls about career moves, relationships, the constant pressure to prove ourselves in male-dominated industries. "Jess," I said, sitting in my car in the Pinnacle parking garage at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, surrounded by the BMWs and Porsches of people who thought rules didn't apply to them. "I need to talk to someone about something I've discovered at work. Something federal." 36 hours later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Scottsdale, across from FBI Special Agent Elena Vasquez, who looked nothing like the FBI agents in movies. She was small, maybe 5'3", with perfectly styled black hair, and the kind of intense dark eyes that made you feel like she could see straight through to your soul. She ordered a vanilla latte and opened a slim laptop. "Jessica Torres speaks very highly of you," she said, her voice warm but professional. "She said you've stumbled onto something significant." I handed her a flash drive. Everything's on there. Financial records, transaction patterns, shell company structures. Theodore Harrington and his team at Pinnacle Investments are running a money laundering operation that processes millions of dollars every month for some very dangerous people. Agent Vasquez plugged in the drive, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as she scanned the files. I watched her expression change from professional interest to focused intensity to something that looked almost like excitement. "This is excellent work," she said finally. "Thorough, detailed, exactly what we'd need to build a case. How long have you been documenting this?" "About 3 weeks," I said. "I started noticing discrepancies and began keeping copies of everything. I have access to their entire financial database, and they don't know you suspect anything." I shook my head. "They think I'm just an overachiever trying to impress them. Theodore keeps telling me I need to understand their sophisticated strategies better." That's when Agent Vasquez leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Viviana, what I'm about to ask you is dangerous. It could put you at risk. But with your access and expertise, you could help us build an airtight case against not just Pinnacle, but their entire network." I knew what she was going to ask before she said it. And I knew my answer before she finished the question. "You want me to go undercover. We want you to become Special Agent Lee." The next morning, I walked into Pinnacle Investments as usual. Same elevator, same polite nods to the security guards, same perfectly climate-controlled office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of the desert mountains. But everything was different now, because I wasn't just Vivienne Chen, Senior Vice President anymore. I was Special Agent Lee, and every document I touched, every meeting I attended, every casual conversation by the coffee machine, was potential evidence in a federal racketeering case. For the first month, it was almost too easy. They trusted me completely, probably because they'd spent so much time conditioning me to doubt my own instincts. When I asked questions about unusual transactions, they'd pat me on the head metaphorically and tell me I'd understand when I had more experience. When I pointed out regulatory concerns, they'd smile and assure me that everything was above board. Theodore would call me into his office for mentoring sessions, where he'd explain how real wealth management worked. "You see, Viviana," he'd say, leaning back in his leather chair like a professor, addressing a particularly slow student, "our clients have complex needs. They operate in multiple jurisdictions, deal with various regulatory environments. What might look irregular to someone with a traditional background is simply sophisticated asset management." Meanwhile, I was photographing every document, recording every conversation I legally could, and building a case that would ultimately bring down not just Pinnacle, but a network of facilitators that stretched from Phoenix to Panama City. But Theodore and his team weren't just money launderers, they were petty, insecure people who got off on having power over others. And as the months went on, as I played my role perfectly and gave them no reason to suspect me, they started treating me worse and worse. It started small. Condescending comments in meetings, being excluded from client dinners, having my ideas presented by male colleagues who'd receive credit for work I'd done. Classic workplace sexism, the kind that women in finance deal with everywhere. But then it escalated. Theodore started questioning my competence publicly, making jokes about my limited understanding of their business model. Cynthia would assign me busy work that was clearly beneath my qualifications, organizing files, updating spreadsheets, tasks that should have been handled by administrative assistants. The worst part was watching how they treated other women in the office. There was Maria Gonzalez in accounting, a brilliant woman with a master's degree in forensic accounting, who they treated like she was lucky to be there. They'd make jokes about her accent, question her calculations in front of clients, assign her the most tedious reconciliation work. There was Patricia Kim in operations, who had more experience with international wire transfers than anyone else in the office, but was consistently passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified men who played golf with Theodore on weekends. And there was Jennifer Walsh, the office manager who'd been with the company for 6 years and knew where every body was buried, who they treated like she was invisible, unless they needed something fetched or coffee made. Watching how they treated these women made my undercover role even more meaningful. I wasn't just gathering evidence against financial criminals. I was documenting a pattern of workplace abuse, gender discrimination, and the kind of toxic corporate culture that enables white-collar crime to flourish. But the breaking point came during month 6 of my undercover operation. I'd been feeding information to Agent Vasquez regularly, and the FBI was getting close to having enough evidence for arrests. We just needed one more piece, documentation of a major transaction that would tie Theodore directly to the cartel money. That's when Theodore made his fatal mistake. The Blackstone Foundation Gala was Pinnacle's biggest networking event of the year. A charity fundraiser that wasn't really about charity, it was about Theodore showing off his connections, his wealth, his power. 500 of Phoenix's elite would attend, including several of Pinnacle's most questionable clients. 2 weeks before the gala, Theodore called me into his office with a smile that should have served as a warning. "Viviana," he said, "I've been thinking about your role at the company." For a moment, I thought he suspected something. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. I think you'd benefit from a more hands-on understanding of our client service approach. So for the Blackstone Gala, instead of attending as a senior vice president, you'll be working with the catering staff. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, you'll be serving champagne appetizers, that sort of thing. It'll give you a different perspective on our clients, help you understand the personal touch that makes Pinnacle special. The room felt like it was tilting. You want me to serve drinks at the company gala? I want you to learn humility, Theodore said, and his mask slipped just enough for me to see the cruelty underneath. You've been with us for 6 months, and frankly, your attitude has been problematic. You ask too many questions, you challenge established processes, you seem to think you know better than people who've been in this business for decades. I realized in that moment that this had nothing to do with my performance or my attitude. This was about power, about putting an uppity woman in her place, about showing everyone at Pinnacle what happened when you didn't know your role. Theodore, I said carefully, I'm a senior vice president. I have clients expecting to see me at this event in a professional capacity. And they'll see you, he said, with that cold smile. They'll see you serving them champagne like the good little employee you are. I should have been angry, I should have been humiliated, and part of me was. But mostly, I was thinking about Agent Vasquez, and the recording device in my purse that had just captured Theodore Harrington III, admitting that he was demoting me as punishment for doing my job too well. I understand, I said quietly. When should I report for service? 6 o'clock sharp. The catering coordinator will provide your uniform. As I left his office, I was already mentally composing my report to Agent Vasquez, because Theodore had just made a crucial mistake. In his arrogance, his need to humiliate me, he'd given me the perfect cover to be invisible at his gala, while documenting everything that happened. He thought he was punishing me. Actually, he'd just given me the best surveillance opportunity of my entire undercover operation. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Agent Vasquez and I planned every detail of the gala operation. I'd be wearing a recording device disguised as a catering pin. There would be 3 other agents in the room, one posing as waitstaff, one as a guest, and Agent Vasquez herself would attend as the +1 of a legitimate business contact. But most importantly, we were expecting a major transaction that night. One of Theodore's biggest clients, a man named Viktor Kozlov, who ran shipping operations that were fronts for arms dealing, was planning to move $15 million through Pinnacle's system during the gala. The transfer would happen at exactly 9 p.m., when most guests would be distracted by the charity auction. I would be perfectly positioned to witness it all while carrying a tray of champagne. Theodore and his colleagues had no idea that their plan to humiliate me had just handed them directly to the FBI. 3 weeks ago, I put on that black server's uniform in the staff changing room at the Grand Lux Hotel. I looked at myself in the mirror, a woman with a PhD in international finance, 8 years of experience at top-tier investment firms, and a spotless professional reputation, dressed to serve drinks to people who saw her as entertainment. But I wasn't the broken woman they thought they were humiliating. I was Special Agent Lee, and I was about to serve them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Before I tell you what happened that night at the Blackstone Foundation Gala, I need you to understand something. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's probably someone in your life who's underestimating you. Maybe it's your boss who takes credit for your ideas. Maybe it's a family member who still talks to you like you're a child. Maybe it's a colleague who thinks they can push you around because you're too polite to push back. I want you to hold on to that feeling, because by the end of this story, you're going to understand something that Theodore Harrington III learned the hard way. The person you're underestimating might be the exact person who destroys you. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever had one of those moments where you realize that everything you thought you knew about your life was completely wrong? Not just a little off, but fundamentally, earth-shakingly wrong. Like you've been living in a house for years, only to discover that the walls were made of paper and the foundation was built on quicksand. That's what happened to me 8 months before the gala, and I need you to understand how deep this betrayal went, because it wasn't just about money laundering, it wasn't just about financial crimes. It was about a systematic effort to erase my identity, my expertise, and my worth as a human being. You see, when I first walked into Pinnacle Investments, I thought I was joining a family. That's what Theodore called it during my interview process. We're not just a company, Viviana. We're a family. We take care of each other here. I should have run the moment he used that word, because in my experience, when a boss tells you that the workplace is a family, what they really mean is that they expect you to accept abuse the way you would from a toxic relative, with silence, loyalty, and a smile. But I was so hungry for belonging, so desperate to prove that a woman of color could succeed in the highest levels of finance, that I ignored every red flag and painted them green in my mind. Let me paint you a picture of what my first month at Pinnacle looked like, because understanding the setup is crucial to understanding why what happened at the gala was so much more than just a business transaction gone wrong. My office was on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Camelback Mountain. Theodore had made a big show of giving me that office during my first week. Only senior vice presidents get corner offices, Viviana. You've earned this. What I didn't realize at the time was that he'd moved Patricia Kim out of that same office to make room for me. Patricia, who'd been with the company for 6 years, who knew every client relationship inside and out, who'd trained half the operations staff, they'd relocated her to a windowless interior office and told her it was temporary. The message was clear to everyone except me. The new girl was more important than the woman who'd been building this company for years. It was brilliant, actually. By appearing to favor me, Theodore created resentment among the women who should have been my natural allies. Patricia avoided me. Maria from accounting would barely make eye contact. Jennifer, the office manager, was professionally polite but nothing more. I thought they were being unfriendly. What I later realized was that they were protecting themselves. They'd learned that getting too close to Theodore's special projects was dangerous. Because here's what I discovered about Theodore Harrington III. He was a collector. Not of art or wine or vintage cars, though he had plenty of those. He collected women's careers and then systematically destroyed them. His pattern was always the same. He'd recruit a highly qualified woman with an impressive background, someone who brought legitimacy to his operation. He'd shower her with attention, give her a prestigious title, make her feel like she was finally getting the recognition she deserved. Then, slowly, methodically, he'd begin the process of undermining her confidence, questioning her competence, and isolating her from potential allies. And finally, when he'd extracted everything useful from her, her connections, her expertise, her reputation, he'd discard her in the most humiliating way possible. I was just the latest in a long line of women who'd fallen for Theodore's con. But here's where Theodore made his biggest mistake. He'd never tried to destroy an FBI agent before. Let me tell you about the moment I realized I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't too sensitive. A phrase Theodore loved to use whenever I questioned anything that didn't seem right. It was my second month at Pinnacle, and I'd been invited to my first client dinner at Bourbon and Bones, one of Phoenix's most exclusive steakhouses. The client was Harrison Westbrook, who supposedly ran a private equity firm, specializing in emerging markets, but whose background check, yes, I did my own research, showed connections to several companies that had been investigated for sanctions violations. Theodore, Cynthia Blackwood, and I arrived together in Theodore's Tesla Model S. During the ride, Theodore briefed me on the client. Harrison can be particular about who he works with, Theodore said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. He prefers to deal with people who understand discretion, people who don't ask too many questions about methodology. What kind of methodology? I asked. Cynthia turned around in the passenger seat with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Viviana, sweetie, some clients value privacy above transparency. That's what makes Pinnacle different from those big corporate firms you're used to. There was that word again, sweetie, like I was a child who needed to be managed rather than a professional who deserved respect. At dinner, I watched Harrison Westbrook carefully. He was about 60, silver-haired, with the kind of deep tan that comes from spending a lot of time on yachts in international waters. He spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't place, Eastern European, maybe, or South African. The conversation stayed light through the first course. Theodore regaled us with stories about his golf games with Phoenix City councilmen. Cynthia discussed her upcoming charity fashion show. Harrison nodded politely but said very little. Then, during the main course, Harrison leaned forward and said quietly, "I'm expecting some funds to arrive from my Kyiv operations next week. Approximately 8 million. I need them cleaned and distributed through the usual channels within 72 hours. I nearly choked on my wine. He just described a textbook money laundering operation in the most casual tone imaginable, like he was discussing the weather. Theodore didn't miss a beat. Of course, Viviana will handle the documentation. She's our new specialist in international transfers. Harrison looked at me for the first time all evening, his pale blue eyes assessing. She's very young, but brilliant, Theodore assured him. PhD from Wharton, 8 years at Goldman Sachs. She understands discretion. I felt like I was watching this conversation from outside my body. 3 professionals discussing federal crimes over $40 stakes while a jazz pianist played soft background music. I'll need the transfers structured through at least 4 jurisdictions, Harrison continued, still looking at me. Nothing traceable back to the source accounts. That's when I realized that Theodore hadn't hired me to be a senior vice president. He'd hired me to be a criminal, but I played my part perfectly. I smiled, nodded, and took mental notes that I would later transcribe in my FBI reports. I'll draft a proposal for your review, I told Harrison. We can have everything in place by Monday. After dinner, during the drive back to the office, Theodore was practically glowing. Excellent work tonight, Viviana. Harrison can be difficult to impress, but I think he likes you. He seems to have very specific requirements, I said carefully. All of our high net worth clients have specific requirements, Cynthia replied. That's why we're able to charge premium fees for our services. Over the following weeks, I processed Harrison's transfer request while documenting every step for the FBI. Hassan worked tonight. The $8 million came from 3 different shell companies registered in Ukraine, passed through banks in Cyprus and Malta, and ended up distributed among what appeared to be legitimate investment accounts across 7 different states. It was sophisticated, professional, and completely illegal, but it was also just the beginning. As my role at Pinnacle expanded, I was introduced to more clients with similar requirements. There was Dmitry Volkov, who needed help moving proceeds from his shipping business, a business that, according to FBI intelligence, was actually smuggling weapons from Eastern Europe to South America. There was Isabella Santos, whose art-dealing enterprise was a front for narcotics distribution through high-end galleries in major U.S. cities. And there was Chen Weiming, whose technology consulting firm was actually a front for cybercrime operations that had stolen millions from American companies. Every one of these clients treated me the same way Harrison had, like I was a useful tool rather than a human being. They would discuss their criminal enterprises in front of me, as if I were a piece of furniture, assuming that my silence was guaranteed. What they didn't realize was that their casual disregard for my humanity was giving me unprecedented access to their operations. But the psychological toll of this double life was enormous. Every day I had to walk into an office where my colleagues were criminals, smile at people who were destroying lives with their greed, and pretend to be someone I wasn't. The worst part was watching how they treated the other women in the office once I understood what was really happening. Maria Gonzalez in accounting wasn't just being given busy work, she was being deliberately excluded from the financial processes that would have revealed the money laundering. Theodore kept her focused on legitimate client accounts while handling all the criminal transactions himself, ensuring that she could never piece together the bigger picture. Patricia Kim in operations wasn't just being overlooked for promotions, she was being systematically gaslighted. Theodore would give her conflicting instructions, then blame her when projects failed. He'd promise her opportunities that never materialized, then tell her she needed to prove herself before being trusted with more responsibility. Jennifer Walsh, the office manager, wasn't just being treated like support staff, she was being used as an unwitting accomplice. Theodore had her scheduling meetings with criminal clients, booking private dining rooms for illegal transactions, and handling travel arrangements for money laundering trips, all while keeping her completely in the dark about what was really happening. These women weren't just my colleagues, they were victims of Theodore's systematic abuse, and they had no idea how deep the criminal enterprise went. But as the months passed and my undercover operation continued, Theodore's treatment of me began to change. The honeymoon period was over, and he was starting the process of breaking me down. It started with small things, questions about my work that implied incompetence rather than curiosity. Viviana, I'm concerned about the timeline on the Volkov transfers. Are you sure you understand the complexity of multi-jurisdictional banking? Theodore, the timeline you approved was based on standard international wire transfer protocols. If there's a specific concern, I just want to make sure we're not over-promising to important clients because of inexperience. Inexperience. I had a PhD in international finance and 8 years of experience managing billion-dollar portfolios, but Theodore was questioning my competence in front of criminal clients. Then there were the exclusions. Suddenly I wasn't invited to certain meetings. Client calls that I should have been part of happened without me. Strategic planning sessions occurred while I was mysteriously sent on errands. Where were you during the Santos meeting? I asked Cynthia one afternoon. Oh, that was just a preliminary discussion. Nothing that required your level of expertise. But I knew better now. I knew that Theodore was beginning the isolation phase of his standard pattern of abuse. The psychological manipulation escalated through months 4 and 5 of my undercover operation. Theodore would praise my work to clients, then privately criticize everything I did. He'd give me impossible deadlines, then act disappointed when I asked for clarification or support. Viviana, I'm starting to wonder if you're the right fit for our culture here at Pinnacle. You seem to need a lot of hand-holding. Because asking for reasonable timelines and clear instructions was apparently a sign of weakness. But the most insidious part of Theodore's psychological warfare was how he turned my own competence against me. You know, Viviana, you have a tendency to overcomplicate things. Our clients appreciate simplicity. When I caught errors in financial documentation, you're being overly rigid about regulations that don't really apply to our client base. When I suggested more secure transfer protocols, you're overthinking this. We've been doing business this way for years without problems. Every time I demonstrated expertise, Theodore found a way to frame it as a character flaw. Too careful became obsessive. Too thorough became inefficient. Too accurate became inflexible. It was masterful gaslighting, designed to make me doubt my own professional judgment and become more compliant with his criminal enterprise. But Theodore had made one crucial miscalculation. He thought he was breaking down Viviana Chen, Senior Vice President. He had no idea that he was actually providing Special Agent Lee with a comprehensive education in how white-collar criminals psychologically manipulate their accomplices. Every conversation I had with Theodore was recorded. Every email he sent undermining my confidence was documented. Every meeting where he excluded me was noted in my FBI reports. He thought he was isolating me from potential allies. Actually, he was giving me evidence of a pattern of psychological abuse that would become a key component of the federal case against him. But the breaking point, the moment when Theodore's psychological warfare turned into outright cruelty, came during month 6, when he made the decision that would ultimately destroy him. I need you to understand that what happened next wasn't just about professional humiliation. It wasn't just about a boss being mean to an employee. What Theodore did was a calculated attempt to break my spirit, destroy my credibility, and ensure my silence about everything I'd witnessed at Pinnacle Investments. He wanted to turn me into another Patricia Kim, a broken woman who would accept abuse rather than fight back. But Theodore had never tried to break an FBI agent before, and that's where this story gets interesting. You see, every woman who's ever been underestimated, every professional who's been dismissed, every person who's been made to feel small by someone in power, we all have a choice to make when the moment of truth arrives. We can accept the role they've assigned us, or we can show them exactly who they're dealing with. Theodore Harrington III was about to learn which choice I'd made. But before I tell you about the gala, before I describe the moment when Agent Vasquez approached me at the dessert station and said those 5 words that changed everything, I want you to think about your own life. Is there someone right now who's treating you like you don't matter? Someone who's making you feel small, invisible, or incompetent? Someone who thinks they can control your career, your reputation, or your future? I want you to remember their face, because by the end of this story, you're going to understand something that every bully, every manipulator, and every criminal needs to learn. The person you're underestimating might be the exact person who brings your entire world crashing down. And sometimes, justice comes wearing a server's uniform and carrying a silver tray. Now let me tell you exactly how Theodore Harrington III orchestrated his own destruction, one humiliating decision at a time. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Theodore made the phone call that would change everything. I was in my corner office, reviewing documentation for what I thought was a legitimate real estate investment. Though by that point, I was documenting everything as potential evidence, when my phone buzzed with a text from Theodore's assistant. Harrington requests your immediate presence in his office. The tone was different. Usually Theodore's meeting requests came with context, client discussion, or portfolio review, or strategic planning. This was just a summons, cold and impersonal. I walked down the marble-floored hallway to Theodore's corner office, noting the way conversations stopped as I passed. Cynthia Blackwood was standing near the elevator, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a coffee cup, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maria Gonzalez looked up from her desk as I passed accounting, then quickly looked away. Something was happening, and everyone knew about it, except me. Theodore's office occupied the entire corner of the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, offering panoramic views of Phoenix and the surrounding desert. The office was designed to intimidate: massive mahogany desk, leather chairs that sat lower than his throne-like executive chair, walls lined with degrees, awards and photographs of Theodore shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. But that morning, Theodore wasn't sitting behind his power desk. He was standing at the windows with his back to me, hands clasped behind him like a general surveying a battlefield. "Close the door, Viviana." I closed the door and waited. In my 6 months of undercover work, I'd learned that Theodore's silences were tactical. He used them to create anxiety, to make people feel uncertain and off balance before delivering whatever blow he'd prepared. Finally, he turned around, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something colder. Calculation mixed with anticipation, like he was about to enjoy something unpleasant. "Sit down." I sat in one of the low chairs, immediately aware of how the positioning made me feel small while Theodore loomed over me from behind his desk. "I've been doing some thinking about your role here at Pinnacle," he began, his voice perfectly calm. "Your performance, your integration with our team culture, your understanding of our business model." Here it comes, I thought. The gaslighting phase was about to escalate, and I've come to some conclusions that I think will benefit both you and the company. He paused, clearly expecting me to ask what conclusions. I didn't give him the satisfaction. "You see, Viviana, when I hired you, I had very high expectations. Your resume was impressive, your credentials impeccable. Goldman Sachs, Wharton, all very prestigious." The way he said prestigious made it sound like a character flaw. But prestige isn't the same as fit, and over these past 6 months, it's become clear that you're not quite fitting into our culture here at Pinnacle. "In what way?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Theodore smiled, the kind of smile that predators use when they're about to pounce. "Well, let's start with your attitude toward our clients. You ask too many questions, you challenge established processes, You seem to think that your way of doing things is superior to methods that have served us very well for years. I thought about Harrison Westbrook, discussing money laundering over steak dinner, about Dmitry Volkov's weapons trafficking, about Isabella Santos's narcotics distribution, methods that had served them very well indeed. I believe in thorough documentation and regulatory compliance, I said carefully. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Regulatory compliance. Theodore leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as if I'd just said something profoundly naive. Our clients don't come to Pinnacle because we follow every bureaucratic rule to the letter. They come to us because we understand that high net worth individuals operate in a complex global environment that requires flexibility. Flexibility. That was Theodore's word for money laundering. But it's not just your professional approach that concerns me. Theodore continued. It's your interpersonal skills, your ability to work as part of a team. This was rich, coming from a man who had systematically isolated me from team meetings and decision-making processes. Can you be more specific? Well, for example, your relationship with the other women in the office. Patricia, Maria, Jennifer. They've expressed some concerns about your approach. My blood ran cold. Theodore was now claiming that the women he'd been psychologically abusing for years were complaining about me. It was a masterful manipulation, turning potential allies against me while making me question my own perceptions. What kind of concerns? They feel that you've been dismissive of their experience, condescending about their roles, unwilling to collaborate effectively. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. Patricia had been moved out of her corner office to make room for me. A decision that had nothing to do with my attitude and everything to do with Theodore's need to create resentment. Maria had been excluded from financial processes long before I arrived. Jennifer had been treated like support staff by Theodore himself for years. But Theodore was brilliant at this. He was taking legitimate grievances that these women had against him, and the toxic culture he'd created, and redirecting their frustration toward me. I see, I said quietly. I'm glad you understand, because that brings me to my decision about your future here at Pinnacle. Here it comes, I thought. He's going to fire me. 6 months of undercover work, and he's going to end it before we can complete the case. But Theodore had something much more creative in mind. I don't think termination is the right solution, he said, and I felt a flicker of relief. I think what you need is a learning experience, an opportunity to understand our clients from a different perspective, to develop some humility about your role in our organization. What kind of learning experience? Theodore's smile widened, and I realized that this was the moment he'd been building toward. This was what he'd been planning, what he'd been anticipating with that cold calculation I'd seen in his expression. The Blackstone Foundation Gala is our most important networking event of the year. 500 of Phoenix's most influential business leaders, philanthropists, and civic figures. It's an opportunity for our team to showcase Pinnacle's commitment to excellence and service. I waited, knowing that the other shoe was about to drop. I want you to be part of that showcase. But instead of attending as a senior vice president, a role you clearly haven't grown into, you'll be working with the catering staff. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm sorry. You'll be serving champagne, appetizers, whatever the catering coordinator assigns. It'll give you a chance to observe our clients in a more natural setting, to understand the personal relationships that make Pinnacle successful. I stared at him, certain I'd misunderstood. You want me to work as a server at the company gala. I want you to learn humility, Theodore said, and now his mask was completely off. The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable. You came here from Goldman Sachs thinking you were going to revolutionize our business model, challenge our methods, show us all how things should really be done. Well, this is how things are really done, Viviana. Our clients are kings and queens, and we serve them. It's time you learned what service really means. The room was spinning. 6 months of psychological manipulation had been building to this moment. Theodore's ultimate power play. He wasn't just demoting me, he was attempting to destroy my professional identity completely. Theodore, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, I'm a senior vice president. I have clients who expect to meet with me at this event in a professional capacity. And they'll meet with you, he said with that predatory smile. They'll meet with you when you serve them their champagne, when you clear their plates, when you show them the kind of personal attention that makes Pinnacle special. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about humiliation. This was about control. Theodore wanted to see if he could break me completely, if he could take a highly qualified professional and reduce her to the role of servant in front of everyone who mattered in Phoenix's business community. It was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. But here's what Theodore didn't understand. He wasn't breaking Vivienne Chen, senior vice president. He was giving Special Agent Lee the perfect cover for the most important surveillance operation of her career. I understand, I said quietly. I'm glad. The catering coordinator will contact you about uniform fitting and service protocols. You'll report to the Grand Lux Hotel at 6 p.m. sharp on the evening of the gala. I stood to leave, but Theodore wasn't finished. Oh, and Viviana, I hope this experience teaches you something valuable about knowing your place. As I walked back to my office, I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Word had already spread that something significant had happened in Theodore's office. Cynthia Blackwood was smirking. Patricia Kim looked sympathetic but frightened, as if she was afraid that associating with me might make her Theodore's next target. But as I sat down at my desk and pulled out my encrypted phone to call Agent Vasquez, I realized that Theodore had just made the biggest mistake of his criminal career. He thought he was punishing me. Actually, he'd just given me access to every criminal client, every illegal transaction, and every piece of evidence the FBI needed to bring down his entire operation. Agent Vasquez, it's Lee, we need to meet. Tonight. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Agent Vasquez in a coffee shop in Scottsdale, watching her expression change from professional interest to barely contained excitement as I described Theodore's plan. He wants you to serve drinks at the gala where Viktor Kozlov is planning to transfer $15 million in arms dealing proceeds. At 9 p.m., during the charity auction when most guests will be distracted, Agent Vasquez leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. Viviana, do you understand what this means? Instead of having one agent trying to observe from across the room, we'll have you right there, moving freely through the crowd, able to witness every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence we need. He thinks he's humiliating me. Actually, he's given me the perfect cover. Better than perfect. Theodore Harrington has just turned his own gala into a federal sting operation, and he has no idea. We spent the next 3 hours planning every detail of the operation. I would be wearing a recording device disguised as a catering pin. Agent Vasquez would attend as the guest of Marcus Chen, a legitimate business contact who'd agreed to cooperate with the FBI. Agent Rodriguez would be working as part of the catering staff. Agent Thompson would be posted outside, coordinating with backup units. But most importantly, we were expecting multiple criminal transactions that night. Viktor Kozlov's $15 million transfer was just the beginning. Intelligence suggested that at least 6 other criminal clients would be using the gala as an opportunity to conduct business with Theodore. This could be the biggest financial crimes bust in Arizona history, Agent Vasquez said as we prepared to leave the coffee shop. Theodore has no idea what's coming. No. He's so focused on his power games that he can't see the bigger picture. That's the problem with men like Theodore. They're so obsessed with control that they make stupid decisions. Agent Vasquez was right. Theodore's psychological need to dominate me had overridden his criminal instincts. A smarter criminal would have simply fired me quietly, with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. But Theodore's ego demanded a more dramatic victory. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, in front of everyone who mattered in Phoenix's business community. He wanted to reduce me from senior vice president to servant, to show the world that he had the power to destroy careers and reputations. Instead, he was about to give me a front row seat to his own destruction. The 2 weeks between Theodore's announcement and the gala were the longest of my undercover career. Every day, I had to walk into Pinnacle Investments and pretend to be a broken woman who was accepting her humiliation gracefully. Theodore was practically glowing during this period. He'd found new ways to be condescending, new opportunities to remind me of my upcoming service opportunity. I spoke with the catering coordinator yesterday, Viviana. She's very pleased that we're providing additional staff support. It shows our commitment to excellence. Additional staff support. As if I were a volunteer rather than a highly qualified professional being deliberately humiliated. I'm looking forward to the learning experience, I replied, playing my role perfectly. But the psychological toll was enormous. Even knowing that this was all part of a larger operation, even understanding that Theodore's cruelty was actually helping our case, it was exhausting to be treated with such contempt every single day. The other women in the office were watching this unfold with a mixture of horror and relief. Horror at seeing how completely Theodore could destroy someone's career, and relief that they weren't his current target. Maria Gonzalez approached me during my final week as senior vice president. "Viviana," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear us. "I just want you to know that I never said those things Theodore claimed I said about you." "I know," I told her. "Theodore is very good at manipulating situations. He did the same thing to Patricia when she was in your office. Made her think that everyone was complaining about her work, when really, he was the one sabotaging her projects. This was valuable intelligence." Theodore had a documented pattern of psychological abuse that extended far beyond my case. "Has he done this to other women?" Maria nodded, looking around nervously. "There was Rebecca Martinez before you came. Senior analyst, brilliant with international tax law. Theodore hired her from Ernst & Young, gave her a big title, then spent 8 months undermining her confidence before she finally quit. What happened to her? Last I heard, she was working for a small accounting firm in Tucson, took a huge pay cut, lost all her contacts in Phoenix. Theodore destroyed her reputation so completely that she couldn't find another position at her level. I filed this information away for Agent Vasquez. Rebecca Martinez would be a crucial witness in establishing Theodore's pattern of behavior. But the most revealing conversation happened during my last day as a senior vice president. I was cleaning out my desk when Jennifer Walsh, the office manager, appeared at my door. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. Of course. Jennifer closed the door and sat down across from my desk. She'd been with Pinnacle for 6 years, longer than anyone except Theodore himself, and she knew where every body was buried. "I know what's happening to you," she said quietly. "And I know it's not fair. It's just a learning experience," I said, maintaining my cover. Jennifer shook her head. "No, it's not. It's punishment for being too good at your job." She leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "Theodore doesn't like smart women. He likes women who make him feel smart. He likes women who need him, who depend on him, who make him feel powerful." "What do you mean? You came here with credentials that were better than his. PhD from Wharton, 8 years at Goldman Sachs. Theodore went to ASU, and his father bought him this company. He's always been insecure about that." This was fascinating. I'd assumed Theodore's treatment of me was about criminal liability, that he was trying to control me because I'd discovered too much about the money laundering operation. But Jennifer was suggesting that it was also about male insecurity and professional jealousy. "So this demotion is about putting you in your place, showing you and everyone else who has the real power here." Jennifer stood up, preparing to leave. But then she turned back with one final piece of information. "Be careful at the gala, Viviana. Theodore invited some very dangerous people, people who don't like witnesses." After she left, I sat in my empty office thinking about what she'd said. Jennifer was right that Theodore had invited dangerous people, but she had no idea that the FBI would be watching every one of them. The morning of the gala, I woke up at 5 a.m. in my apartment in Tempe, looking out at the desert sunrise and preparing mentally for what would either be the culmination of my undercover career or the most humiliating night of my professional life. At 6 a.m., Agent Vasquez called with final instructions. Remember, your priority is gathering evidence, not heroics. If anything feels unsafe, if any situation escalates beyond surveillance, you extract immediately. Understood. The recording device will capture everything within a 15 markers for Sinfert. Try to position yourself near the high-value targets whenever possible. Viktor Kozlov, Dmitry Volkov, Isabella Santos, Chen Weiming. Exactly. Theodore will likely want to show you off to them. His tamed senior vice president reduced to serving drinks. Use that to get close. At 4 p.m., I drove to the Grand Lux Hotel in downtown Phoenix. The hotel was a monument to excess, marble lobby, crystal chandeliers, the kind of ostentatious luxury that appeals to people who need to display their wealth publicly. The catering coordinator, an efficient woman named Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to Agent Rodriguez, met me in the staff preparation area. You must be Viviana. Mr. Harrington spoke very highly of your willingness to help with tonight's event. I almost laughed. Theodore's version of events had somehow transformed forced humiliation into voluntary service. I'm happy to help however I can. Lisa handed me a black uniform, white shirt, black vest, black slacks, comfortable black shoes. The kind of outfit designed to make service staff invisible to wealthy guests. You'll be working the cocktail hour and dinner service. Focus on the VIP tables. Mr. Harrington provided a list of guests who should receive special attention. She handed me a sheet of paper, and I recognized every name on it. Viktor Kozlov, Dmitry Volkov, Isabella Santos, Chen Weiming, Harrison Westbrook. Every criminal client Theodore had introduced me to over the past 8 months. Theodore had literally provided me with a target list. At 6 p.m. sharp, I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Grand Lux Hotel, wearing a server's uniform and a FBI recording device, watching Phoenix's elite arrive in their designer gowns and custom tuxedos. The ballroom was spectacular, soaring ceilings, massive chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, round tables covered in white linen, each centerpiece a small fortune in orchids and roses, a stage at one end where the charity auction would take place at 9 p.m., and in the center of it all, Theodore Harrington III, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, holding court like the king of his criminal empire. But as I moved through the crowd with my tray of champagne flutes, I noticed something that Theodore had missed in his arrogance. I wasn't invisible to his guests. I was the woman they'd been introduced to as Pinnacle's senior vice president for international markets. I was the professional who'd handled their sophisticated transfer requirements for months, and now I was serving them drinks. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and obvious. Harrison Westbrook nearly dropped his champagne flute when I approached his table. Viviana, what are you? Are you working tonight? Just helping with the service, Mr. Westbrook. Can I refresh your champagne? He looked confused, embarrassed, like he wasn't sure whether to acknowledge me or pretend he didn't recognize me. Viktor Kozlov was more direct. When I served his table, he looked me up and down with obvious disdain. This is interesting choice, Theodore, he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Your senior vice president is now waitress. Theodore appeared at my elbow, his hand gripping my arm just tight enough to be painful. Viviana is learning about client service from the ground up, he said, with that predatory smile. It's important for all our team members to understand every aspect of our operation. But Victor wasn't buying it. He was a criminal, but he was also a businessman, and he understood power dynamics. In my country, when executive becomes servant, it means executive has been punished. The table went quiet. Other guests were starting to notice the conversation. Theodore's perfect evening was beginning to show cracks. It's a learning opportunity, Theodore repeated, but his voice was tighter now. Victor leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying Theodore's discomfort. Yes, I understand learning. In my business, when someone learns too much, they sometimes have accidents. The threat was unmistakable. Victor Kozlov was telling Theodore and me that people who became liabilities in his organization didn't just get they disappeared. But Theodore was too focused on his power game to hear the warning. Well, fortunately, we handle things more civilized here, he said with forced lightness. Victor's smile was cold. Yes, very civilized. We discuss business at 9 p.m., as planned. Of course, Viviana will be serving during the auction, so we'll have privacy. I moved away from the table, my heart racing. Not from fear, but from excitement. Victor had just confirmed the timing of the major transaction, and Theodore had inadvertently revealed that they planned to conduct criminal business during the charity auction, when they assumed I would be too busy serving to pay attention. They had no idea that the server with the champagne tray was wearing a FBI recording device that was capturing every word. As the evening progressed, I moved through the ballroom like a ghost, invisible to some guests, uncomfortably visible to others, but perfectly positioned to observe everything that mattered. I watched Dmitry Volkov pass Viktor Kozlov a thumb drive that undoubtedly contained shipping manifests for weapons transfers. I saw Isabella Santos hand Chen Weiming a small package that probably contained encryption keys for narcotics transaction accounts. I observed Harrison Westbrook receiving wire transfer authorization codes from Theodore himself. All of it captured on FBI recording equipment, all of it admissible in federal court. But the most damning evidence came at exactly 9 p.m., during the charity auction, when Theodore assumed I was too distracted by service duties to pay attention to his criminal enterprise. I was stationed near the bar, ostensibly organizing champagne flutes, when Viktor Kozlov approached Theodore. "Is your waitress problem solved?" Viktor asked quietly. "What waitress problem?" Theodore replied, confused. "Your former executive. The one who asks too many questions. Is she managed?" Theodore glanced in my direction, saw me arranging glasses and smiled. "Completely managed. Viviana learned her lesson about challenging established processes. Good, because tonight's transfer cannot have complications. 15 million, as discussed. Clean and distributed within 72 hours. Yes. And your fee? 2% as always." Victor handed Theodore a small device that looked like a car key fob. "Authorization codes. Transfer initiates when you press the button." Theodore took the device, examining it like a child with a new toy. "Victor, it's been a pleasure doing business with you."
Business, yes.
But remember, Theodore, people who know too much about our business sometimes have short careers. Again, the threat was unmistakable. Victor was warning Theodore that loose ends needed to be tied up. People who could connect Victor's money to its criminal sources needed to be silenced. People like me. But Theodore was so intoxicated by his sense of power, so pleased with his successful humiliation of me, that he missed Victor's message completely. "Don't worry about loose ends," Theodore said confidently. "Everyone who matters knows their place." At 9:15 p.m., Theodore pressed the button on Victor's device, initiating a $15 million money laundering transaction, while standing 15 feet from an FBI agent wearing a recording device. What he didn't realize was that his broken employee was Special Agent Viviana Lee, and she'd just recorded enough evidence to send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. At 9:30 p.m., as the charity auction reached its climax with Phoenix's elite bidding on vacation packages and artwork, Agent Elena Vasquez approached the bar where I was stationed. The look on Theodore's face when he realized what was happening will stay with me for the rest of my life. He was standing 20 feet away, basking in the applause as the auction concluded, when he saw Agent Vasquez approach me at the bar. At first he looked confused. Why was one of his guests talking to the server? Then he saw me hand Agent Vasquez my catering pin, the recording device that had captured every criminal conversation of the evening. Then he saw Agent Rodriguez emerge from the kitchen, no longer dressed as catering staff but wearing FBI windbreaker and badge. Victor Kozlov tried to run. He made it exactly 12 feet before Agent Thompson tackled him next to the orchid centerpiece at table 7. Dmitry Volkov attempted to destroy evidence by swallowing the thumb drive he'd passed earlier. Agent Rodriguez performed the Heimlich maneuver, not to save his life but to preserve evidence. Isabella Santos threw her purse at Agent Vasquez and screamed something in Spanish that I'm pretty sure wasn't a compliment. Chen Weiming simply sat in his chair, shaking his head and muttering, "This is impossible. This is impossible." Special Agent Viviana Lee, Financial Crimes Unit, I replied, removing my server's vest to reveal my badge and weapon. "You're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. But you worked for me. You were my employee. Actually, Theodore, I worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You were my assignment." The handcuffs clicked into place with the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. But here's what made it even sweeter. As the FBI led Theodore and his criminal clients out of the grand ballroom in handcuffs, I could see the other guests, Phoenix's business elite, finally understanding what they'd witnessed. They'd watched Theodore Harrington III systematically humiliate a woman who they'd assumed was powerless. But what they'd actually watched was a federal agent gathering evidence while her target provided her with perfect cover for the most successful undercover operation in FBI financial crimes history. Theodore thought he was demonstrating his power. Instead, he demonstrated that his arrogance, his need to control and humiliate women, was stronger than his criminal instincts. The sentences came down this morning. Agent Vasquez said, sliding a folder across her desk. Theodore got 25 years for racketeering and money laundering. Victor Kozlov got 30 for arms trafficking. The others got between 15 and 20 years each. And the other women at Pinnacle. He thought he was breaking me. I said. Actually, he was giving me the perfect opportunity to break him. What's next for you, Agent Lee? I thought about that question for a moment. 8 months of undercover work, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, of enduring psychological abuse and systematic humiliation, had taught me something important about myself. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I was more resilient than Theodore had assumed, and I was definitely more dangerous than any criminal would ever expect. I think I'd like to do this again, I said finally. There are a lot of Theodore Harringtons out there who think they can abuse women with impunity. Maybe it's time they learned otherwise. You might not be an FBI agent. You might not have a badge and handcuffs and the full weight of federal law enforcement behind you. But you have something that Theodore never understood. You have your own worth, your own strength, and your own ability to choose how your story ends. Theodore wanted me to serve champagne. Instead, I served him justice. He wanted to watch me fall. Instead, he got to watch himself get arrested. He wanted me silent. Instead, I gave him a story that the whole world could see. The person who's trying to break you down, to make you feel invisible, to convince you that you don't matter, they're wrong. You do matter. You are stronger than they think. And sometimes if you're patient, if you're smart, and if you're willing to play the long game, you can turn their own cruelty against them. Theodore Harrington III thought he was teaching me about knowing my place. Instead, I taught him that my place was anywhere I chose to be, and his place was in a federal prison cell. Drop a comment below and tell me about your own Theodore Harrington. Tell me about the person who's underestimating you right now. Because I read every single comment, and I want you to know that somewhere out there, someone believes in your strength, even when you don't believe in it yourself. Especially when you don't believe in it yourself. The people who try to make us feel small do it because they're afraid of how powerful we really are. Maybe it's time to show them their right to be afraid.